landmark report with a dire warning. The UN says 1 million species are on the brink of extinction, and we've got no one to blame but ourselves. I'm Imran Garda, and today's newsmaker is the global biodiversity crisis. Last year, scientists warned we had about a decade to stop catastrophic levels of global warming. Last week came another stark alert. Humans are killing off, well, almost everything around us. A UN body found that the loss of species was accelerating hundreds of times faster than ever before. Now as many as 1 million species are on the verge of extinction, and without them, we could be too. Sounds like news that would dominate the headlines. But on the day the report was released, only 2 British newspapers had it on their front page. So, are we, the media, complicit in failing to adequately cover this crisis? And what can still be done to save the planet? Denise Savoya reports.
We are systematically destroying the very things we depend on for survival. Nature is declining globally at rates unprecedented in human history.
These cufflinks of watches show me and remind me we have no time to waste. The scale is immense. If we do not act now, many of the million threatened species will become as extinct as the dodo on this tide.
It's a dire warning from one of the world's top scientists. The biggest contributor to this decline is human use and abuse of land and sea resources. We've altered or destroyed 3/4 of land environments, 2/3 of marine habitats, and 85% of the most important wetland regions. More than 1/3 of the world's land and nearly 75% of freshwater resources are now devoted to crop or livestock production. The knock-on effects are potentially catastrophic for human life, from water shortages to more climate instability. The UN says governments that focus purely on economic growth are a significant part of the problem.
Governments need to realise that both climate change and loss of biodiversity are development issues. They undermine food security, water security, energy. They need to understand that if we degrade our environment, both climate change, loss of nature, it costs us economically. The cost of action is much cheaper than the cost of inaction.
The report found that biodiversity in regions managed by Indigenous people isn't declining as rapidly. So it's urging policymakers to listen to their expertise, which historically has been ignored.
The knowledge is there. We need to move to more bold implementation.
Worldwide reaction to the report has been somewhat tempered. It had to compete for space with news of the birth of a British royal. While in the US, 3 major TV news networks failed to mention it during prime time on the day the report was released. And it's not just this report that's fighting for attention. Media Matters found that US TV news coverage of climate change dropped 45% in 2018. But despite all evidence to the contrary, the report's authors hope this time will take notice.
We don't want that people feel discouraged, that there is nothing that can be done, that we've lost the battle, because we have not lost the battle. We really want everyone to feel that they can contribute, that they are part of the solution.
It seems quite clear that we're not there yet, that we still do have time, but we don't have time to dither around. It's time to get started.
So, what are we waiting for? Denise Savoya, The Newsmakers.
Well, to discuss this, I'm joined now in London by Andrew Medhurst. He's an independent Green candidate in the upcoming European elections. He quit a 30-year career in banking to devote himself to the only thing he says matters, fixing the environment. And in Durham, North Carolina, is award-winning scientist Stuart Pym. He's a professor of conservation ecology at Duke University and studies modern-day extinctions and how to prevent them. Stuart, let me start with you. This UN report came out and said that we're to blame for the possible extinction of up to 1 million species, plant and animal. Is that accurate or an exaggeration?
Well, it makes a great headline, and I don't think we should quibble with the number. The reality is that we are doing irreparable harm to Earth's biodiversity, and what is clear is that we're driving species to extinction 1,000 times faster than they would go extinct naturally.
Right. Andrew, people can just about understand their carbon footprint after many, many years of having it explained to them. And that's being optimistic, right? How do you actually get people to understand their biodiversity footprint when they're told that, I don't know, logging might drive extinctions and so on? This is a big thing. People just don't know how to handle it, do they?
I think it's very difficult to appeal to individuals to change their lifestyles. I think the onus is on governments to actually help its citizens understand what the implications are of not acting. One of the problems that I found is that governments are not telling citizens the truth. As a result, citizens are either ignorant or ill-informed about what's going on, and ill-informed about the consequences of business as usual. So from that point of view, it's not for me to sort of tell individuals what the implications of any particular action or non-action are. It's for governments to take some sort of responsibility and start protecting their citizens.
Stuart Pym, are we partly to blame as media not prioritizing the fact that everybody might die and the planet might die, not prioritizing it as we should?
I don't think the planet's going to die, and I don't think we're going to die. But, you know, I think the evidence of what we're doing is all around us. You know, when we go to the supermarket, the fish that's available to us is very different from the fish that I ate when I was growing up in England 50 years ago. We're clearly chopping the world's forests down. You can see that imagery, that satellite imagery showing what's happening to the Amazon and elsewhere. And across much of, particularly Asia, we're clearly damaging the land's ability to sustain us. So I think the consequences of our human actions are there if we look for them, and I think it's important to get the media to tell this story in a compelling and a visually compelling way.
Are we partly to blame, Andrew?
I think we're definitely to blame. It's not necessarily each of our's fault. So I don't think it's sensible to sort of start pointing the finger and blaming and shaming individuals. We are all complicit. I'm as complicit as anybody else. As a citizen of a westernized economy, I am complicit, and I recognize that. I might have acted out of ignorance if the thought that I could fly 3, 4, 5 times a year, go on holidays, assuming I can afford it, eat meat as many times as I want it. I'm complicit. Mm-hmm. The reality is, though, once you're informed and educated about the consequences of those actions, unless you're a psychopath, you start to say, well, if they are the consequences, and particularly they are the consequences for my children and future generations, then perhaps I'm prepared to sort of play my part and put the foot on the emergency brake, as I think all economies need to do to sort of change behaviors.
Yeah, so when looking at this report, it says the top 5 drivers for biodiversity extinctions are land and sea use, logging, mining, harvesting, etc., hunting and fishing for food, climate change, which is interestingly 3rd in the report, pollution, and invasive alien species, which is the 5th. Stuart Pym, when this goes out there, it becomes politicized, right? So the left wing says, all of this is happening because capitalism is broken. And the right wing says these people want to gut our standard of living and they want to take us back to, I don't know, the Soviet Union or Mao Zedong's China and make us all embrace socialism, which is worse. And the argument becomes political and nothing really happens. So how do we get out of that trap?
Well, I think this report is very important because it represents a global consensus based on the opinions of, 1,500 of the world's experts that talks to the science. We need to get the science right. We need to know what's going on. But I've just come back from China. I spent a month in China, and I look at what China has done, learning from its lessons in the 1960s when it chopped a lot of its forests down. It's reforested a large version, a large portion of the country, countries realize very quickly that this isn't a matter of politics. It isn't a matter of capitalism versus communism. It's a matter that if you destroy the environment, it's going to turn around and bite back. And that message needs to be understood clearly, and it's independent of any political arguments.
Andrew, given that we're running out of time, it does appear that something massive needs to happen. I mean, on a similar scale to the Paris Climate Accord that we saw in 2015, but even that, a lot of it got reversed because of changes in administration and so on, right? So is there an inevitability that things might just have to physically start breaking up around us for us to recognize the scale of the emergency?
Well, it's already breaking up, right? I mean, climate change is here. Species are going extinct in record numbers. I don't think it's a political issue. One of the things I've done as an activist at Extinction Rebellion is to give a talk heading for extinction. And you know, rebelling is not a sort of lefty socialist sort of thing to do. There's over many hundreds of years, there are liberal and conservative thinkers that say when governments fail to adopt the precautionary principle to protect its citizens, this is not about getting the science 100%. The science is saying we are in grave danger. And, you know, the political thought over the last few hundred years, liberal and conservative, is that the citizens have a duty, if not an obligation, to rebel against government because our house is on fire now and we have to act now. As soon as we start to see climate change impacting the global north, it'll be too late. And essentially it's already happening terribly in the global south, and we have to wake up. But it's, you know, it's going to start happening here in greater frequency as well.
Stuart Pym, for individuals who say, yes, you tell me that we're destroying our planet, but I work at a donut store and I live paycheck to paycheck. What can I do? What must I do? These things are much bigger than anything that I can contribute to. Is that fair? There are
a large number of individual decisions that we make, and they all involve living, treading more lightly upon the landscape. We make choices about what we eat. We make choices about how much energy we consume. And my experiences are that there's a lot of things that I can do which change my lifestyle very little, but dramatically reduce how much impact I have on the environment. I think once we're well informed, there's a lot of things we can do as individuals, as communities, as nations, to make this problem be much less serious than it is now.
Right. An unprecedented decline in global biodiversity. We're in big trouble, and it's been good to talk to the people who care about trying to reverse that massive decline. Andrew Medhurst and Stuart Pym, hope to have you back on The Newsmaker sometime soon. Thanks for joining us. Abortion is one of the most polarizing issues in the United States, and a controversial new law in the state of Georgia has placed it right back in the spotlight. The so-called heartbeat bill bans abortions after a doctor can detect a fetal heartbeat. That can be as early as 6 weeks and is often before women even know they're pregnant. The legislation is likely to face a long legal challenge. Several pro-abortion activists say it violates the Supreme Court's historic Roe versus Wade decision. But America's top court now leans to the right. And with several states enacting restrictive abortion laws, is that landmark ruling on track to be overturned? Francis Collings explains.
It was signed last Tuesday and is due to become law in the new year. The governor of Georgia, Brian Kemp, putting his signature to what is known as the Heartbeat Bill.
I understand, like the others have said, that some oppose this legislation. I realize that some may challenge it in the court of law. But our job is to do what is right, not what is easy.
He's seeking to make abortion illegal in the state of Georgia, from the moment the heartbeat of a fetus can be detected. In most cases, this can be as early as 6 weeks into a pregnancy. Those opposed to the bill say this is also before many women realize they are pregnant. The pushback in Georgia and elsewhere has been forceful.
This is not just about abortion. This is restricting access to health care services, specifically for marginalized communities, specifically for Black people, specifically for queer people, specifically for trans people and non-binary people here in Georgia.
But it's not just in Georgia. Mississippi and Ohio have brought in near-identical bills in the last 2 months, although courts have blocked similar laws in Iowa and Kentucky. A legal battle in the highest court in the land may be looming. At the heart of the intense debate in the United States is a Supreme Court verdict from 1973. The Roe v. Wade ruling guaranteed a mother's right to choose until a fetus is developed enough to live outside a woman's uterus. Anti-abortion legislators are inviting legal challenges to their strict laws, hoping a case will land before the Supreme Court. In recent years, the highest legal authority has been finely balanced between left and right, which effectively protected the ruling. But President Trump has been able to make 2 lifetime appointments to the court, both conservatives. Most recently, the controversial selection of Brett Kavanaugh, who was accused of sexual assault.
This confirmation process has become a national disgrace.
The Roe v. Wade ruling, the constitutional right to abortion, may be in danger of being overturned.
It's about preventing women from having control over our bodies, our families, our futures, and it's about punishing women and healthcare providers.
Those on the pro-choice side of the debate are fighting back. In January, New York signed into law a bill safeguarding abortion rights after 24 weeks in certain cases. But what has happened in Georgia has provoked a strong reaction in the entertainment industry, and it has financial muscle in the state. Film and TV bring in more than $2 billion a year to Georgia. Blockbusters such as Black Panther and the Hunger Games films were shot there, as was the TV series The Walking Dead. Already some production companies say they won't film there. And actor Alyssa Milano has started a social media campaign urging women not to have sex in protest of the laws. She tweeted, "Until women have legal control over our own bodies, we just cannot risk pregnancy." While 50 actors have proposed a boycott of production in the state, including Amy Schumer, Alec Baldwin and Sean Penn. A growing Hollywood boycott is likely to slow the progress of the bill. But Georgia is far from alone in wanting to redefine the abortion laws in the United States. Francis Collins, The Newsmakers.
Let us bring in our guests. In Atlanta, Georgia, we have Joshua Edmonds. He's the executive director of the anti-abortion group, the Georgia Life Alliance, and he was involved in drafting the bill. Also in Atlanta is Krystal Redman. She's the executive director of the pro-abortion rights group Spark Reproductive Justice Now. And Mary Ziegler joins us from Tallahassee, Florida. She's a law professor and author of the book After Roe, The Lost History of the Abortion Debate. I thank you all for joining us. Krystal, how much of a loss is this law to you and your movement?
I wouldn't say this is a loss because the bill has not been enacted into law. I believe it's set to go into law at the top of 2020. So right now, as every other fight in reproductive health rights and justice, we continue to take the next steps in this fight. We just know that this fight is a lot longer than we initially planned for, but our next step now is to definitely be alongside as some of our partners pursue legal actions to the state of Georgia.
Okay, although it was signed into law, yes, it will only be enacted later on, but it went from being a bill to a law because the governor signed it, right? Brian Kemp. Joshua Edmonds, are you proud of this legislation?
Right, Kemp did sign.
Absolutely. You know, when you look at what science tells us, that in the womb, at the moment of fertilization, there is a genetically whole, unique, living human being, and that the current law in Georgia allows for children with beating hearts up to 20 weeks old, 5 months in the womb, to be killed in abortion. And then you see the strides forward that we've made in this kind of legislation to protect those children in the womb with beating hearts. This is absolutely a victory, and we're so proud that Governor Kemp followed through on signing this legislation last week.
Krystal, the measure makes some exceptions in the case of rape and incest if the woman files a police report first and to save the life of the mother. With that in mind, do you find some consolation, or are you against it completely?
No, not at all. I'm against it, and please call me by my title, Dr. Redman. I know that if folks are talking about medical science, we need to actually discuss what the medical implications of the bills truly means to people here in Georgia, and we can get into that if that's something you wanted to discuss. But specifically regarding these exceptions to this new law, no, I don't think that this is something that, especially as reproductive justice leaders and providers, that we're excited about. I think this causes further harm to people who already are in a most difficult situation to begin with.
Mary Ziegler, Roe versus Wade in 1973 made abortion legal nationwide. Is that now going to come under scrutiny because of what's happening in Georgia and other states?
I think that's both the hope and the expectation of legislators who are passing laws like the one on the books in Georgia. And the reason it's happening now, as opposed to several years ago, is that the Supreme Court's composition has changed. We now have 2 new members of the court nominated by President Trump. And I think many experts, myself included, expect the court to eventually overturn Roe, maybe not formally, maybe in substance, not in form. I think the question is how and when. And so there's actually a division, I think, among pro-life forces or abortion opponents about exactly what the best strategy is to get the court to overturn Roe. And exactly when it's going to happen.
Right. So, Krystal, where Republicans control states, they're going to push for this, right? We've seen similar bills in Kentucky, in Ohio, in Mississippi. They're preparing them in South Carolina, in Tennessee, in Alabama. How do you fight back when state after state is pushing for this?
Well, I believe just like states have their strategies, movement leaders, people that are on the ground have our strategies too as well. And this is something that's not new. We know that attacks on bodies, specifically Black and brown bodies, and folks who have been historically most oppressed, have always occurred here. Not just in Georgia, not just in Ohio, but throughout our nation. So we know that this fight is not a new fight, and we've always built collective strategy, and we'll continue to build those strategies.
Joshua, I'm looking at Alabama, who are drafting a bill where there's no exemptions for rape or incest, 99 years in prison for a doctor performing an abortion. Would you agree that that's a bit extreme?
Well, you know, Georgia's law, when it was originally introduced in the legislature, didn't have any exceptions in the bill. And the reason is, if you look at the language of our bill, we state right at the beginning of Section 2 that a child in the womb is counted as a natural person in our law because science tells us at the moment of fertilization that a child is a unique, living, genetically whole human being. And if we believe that those children deserve protection under law because they're a person, then we shouldn't make any exceptions for that. And so, you know, with the current law allowing to abort a child up to 5 months old in the womb, we recognize that it was important for us to take that step to go back to when the heart begins and to make no exceptions. And it was once the bill went through the committee process that the exceptions were added in our bill.
And the Supreme Court of the United States, Joshua, recognizes a woman's right to an abortion until 24 weeks. So clearly you have a problem with that. Would you only consider this a victory for you and your movement if you can go all the way up to the Supreme Court and change that?
Well, you know, we wrote and introduced this law with the intent of it going into effect in Georgia. And something that makes our law a little bit different from the other states who have passed similar legislation is, like I mentioned, in our bill, we actually recognize that a child in the womb is a natural person. And because of that, we're recognizing that there should be some protections in place to restrict access to aborting babies at 5 months, like the current law allows. And so if that bill, if that law is seen before the courts, I think it'll be a bit of a novel question, because we're not just talking about regulating one procedure, but we're talking about whether or not the child in the womb is a person, like was discussed in the Roe proceedings in 1973, when Justice Blackmun said that if personhood were established for the child, then his right to life would be guaranteed under the 14th Amendment, and abortion rights case would fall apart. So that's the prerogative behind the bill, is to establish personhood rather than just regulating a medical procedure.
Krystal, when we hear Joshua, he leans on science a lot and says, well, science tells us when a child is a child and when somebody should be protected, somebody's life should be protected. From your perspective, how do you feel about that? Is he correct in his scientific approach?
Well, first, I would like to remind you, please address me by Dr. Redman. And also, absolutely not, he's not correct in his approach. I don't know if the person has any medical background that's speaking, or has anything to do with patient care or anything in reproductive health and maternal and child health. I would argue maybe not, or is in medical science. But no, medical science tells us at a point of viability, that's when personhood is determined. And at 6 weeks, at 12 weeks, at 11 weeks, whatever the restriction is, but specifically here in Georgia up to 6 weeks, that's not the point of viability. Okay. That's what medical science tells us, that this is, at this point, it is fetal tissue. It is not, as the person spoke, a child. When you speak about medical science, you speak about child. Even if you approach the CDC's definition of child and childhood, it is not at a point of in your womb. Okay. So if we were going to speak about terminology and refer back to medical science, please then address what specifically medical science says, okay, and give references.
Okay, and Krystal, my apologies if you were offended. I didn't even know you're a doctor, so if you are a medical doctor, I apologize. The title I have for you is Krystal Redman, Executive Director of the of Spark Reproductive Justice, and I will call you Dr. Redman from here on in. And the reason I ask you this, right, and I'm going to bring you in a second, Mary, but Krystal, one of the reasons, Dr. Redman, I ask you this is because a lot of people who are for reproductive rights and for a woman's choice to abort claim that the other side uses science, but it's actually just religion claiming science. Is that how you feel?
I don't necessarily know if it's religious claiming science. I am in the business of recognizing true medical science and public health research, so I don't know where these data points come from. I'm a person that has been in the hearings here in Georgia and have heard testimonies from my medical colleagues with ACOG and just medical colleagues with large medical institutions here that do provide abortion care services. And I have personally given testimony, and I have not heard or seen any research from some folks on opposition have stated, and even in these hearings, our current lawmakers and folks question where do these data points come from, and we haven't gotten a clear answer. So I don't want to be in the business of questioning where the data points come from. I'm in the business more so of understanding and upholding the true science that has been published and documented and continues to be articulated from the medical professionals that are in my circle.
Joshua, is your position a religious one dressed up as science?
Well, like I mentioned, science tells us, and I believe every credible medical scientist would say, that the human lifespan begins at the moment of fertilization. We don't get a human from a non-human. The law of biogenesis tells us that humans reproduce more humans. And so anyone who took 8th grade biology could tell you that at the moment of fertilization, there is a genetically unique, whole, living human being in the womb. But Joshua, I don't know that there's any data
you're talking about it as if
it's
an established fact around the world. Yes, there's debate about when a child becomes viable. That's why we're having this debate, and it's been debated forever and ever, right? It's not something that's uniformly accepted and universally accepted around the world. Would you concede that?
I would not. I believe that it's universally accepted that life begins at the moment of fertilization. That is a genetically whole, living human being at fertilization. Viability is simply the point that the child could live externally from the womb, which as science progresses in our country and around the world, that number goes back earlier and earlier in pregnancy. And so because science tells us life begins at fertilization, common sense tells us that our law should recognize the right to life of that child earlier and earlier, which is what we did with this bill.
Mary Ziegler, this is one of those debates that's a signpost of the culture wars in the United States. Tell me why we're having this discussion in the year 2019.
In some ways, we've always been having this discussion. I think I'm a historian of this debate, and if you start before Roe v. Wade, frankly, you would have very similar debates about whether personhood is a legal concept, a medical concept, or a philosophical concept. What I think has changed in part, there are two things. I think first that the court has changed, and what would have been kind of long shot bills, and in my opinion, I think may still be long shot bills, now are appealing to lawmakers in a way that they wouldn't have before. And secondly, I think the political calculus has changed. I think that for example, in the 1990s or the early 2000s, I think a lot of lawmakers who would have deemed themselves either pro-choice or pro-life would have been trying to reach to the middle on this issue and to paint the other side as kind of extremist. And now I think you see really pro-choice and pro-life legislators reaching for the extremes and hoping to win at the ballot box, not by appealing to the kind of mushy middle of voters, but instead to appeal to their base and kind of excite people who care the most deeply about these issues. So I think what you're seeing is a point on a continuum, but what has changed, I think, is the type of legislation you're seeing passed and considered in the states.
Dr. Redman, what would you advise women who are considering abortions right now in Georgia, and now they've read the news and they know that the state is firmly against it?
Yeah, I think that people in Georgia who are considering abortion as a medical option to continue to reach out to your providers, reach out to advocate groups that can provide you with resources to whatever decision you decide, including a medical decision to have an abortion.
Joshua Edmonds, what don't people get about your position?
You know, I think that it's important to understand that policy like the Life Act is being written and enacted in a context that Georgia is trying to create a culture that respects life and that protects women and children and families. You know, this year, in addition to the Life Act, we also passed and signed legislation that prevents shackling pregnant inmates in Georgia. We also wrote $2 million of a state grant into our state budget that provides money to pregnancy health organizations to provide free care and services to women in low-income areas in Georgia who are looking for help and don't just want to go seek out an abortion and be charged for medical care when they go into facilities like Planned Parenthood. We also had in 2016 a law, the Rape Survivor Custody Act, that denies parental rights to rapists who get women pregnant. And we also even wrote in $91 million new into our state budget to try to crack down on the maternal mortality crisis that Georgia's facing. So it's easy for headlines to isolate this issue into a vacuum and make it look one way or another for political talking points. But Georgia is leading the nation in trying to pass policy that respects women and children, protects life, and creates a culture that allows our families to thrive here in Georgia.
Mary Ziegler, even though each state looks at this individually, does it matter who's in charge in the White House? Come next year, if a Bernie Sanders becomes president, is this debate going to swing the other way?
Well, I think it could. One of the questions, I think, right, is if there's going to be 5 votes to uphold a bill like the one in Georgia. And if you ask me to bet right now, I would say not very soon. I think Chief Justice Roberts, who's the apparent swing vote, has been very clear that he cares about the court's reputation as a nonpartisan institution, which I don't think means he will be interested in upholding Roe. I do think it means he would be interested in going pretty slow and dismantling Roe in a way that would make it look like the court took precedent seriously. So I don't, for that reason, see him deciding in the next year that a law like Georgia's was constitutional. So if, for example, Bernie Sanders were elected, you could theoretically have a retirement or death of another justice who might move the court even further to the right and make someone other than Chief Justice Roberts the swing vote. That's really the only significance I can see, because I presume we already have 5 votes to dismantle Roe. I just would be surprised if it happens as quickly or as explicitly as potentially some of the other panelists might.
Right. Okay. Well, it's been really good talking to all of you. Joshua Edmonds, Dr. Krystal Redman, and Mary Ziegler. Thanks for joining us here on the Newsmakers. If you've spent much time on the internet, you've probably come across Alex Jones. He's best known for conspiracy theories, and he's made a career for himself propagating them online. But if you want to go and check him out on Facebook or Instagram, well, you cannot. The controversial host of InfoWars, along with several other prominent right-wing figures, have been banned by the social media giant. Why? Well, here's a taste of what he does.
I don't like gay people. I don't like them putting chemicals in the water that turn the friggin' frogs gay. Do you understand that? Serious crap.
Well, Facebook says Jones's content violates its policies against dangerous individuals. It's a decision celebrated by many. In fact, some asked why it took so long. But others, including the US president himself, are calling it social media censorship. Well, our guest today is none other than Alex Jones himself, and he joins us from Austin, Texas. Alex, good to have you on the Newsmaker. So Facebook says you're a dangerous individual. Are you a dangerous individual?
Only to tyrants, only to oppressors. I'm dangerous to the establishment, I helped get Trump elected. And so for the last 10 months, they've been deplatforming me everywhere. And they use a offshore organization's designation called the Southern Poverty Law Center to call me a dangerous individual. I've never been convicted of a crime. I've never been sentenced to jail. I have perfect credit. I have over 100 employees. I've had up to 100 million viewers and listeners per week before. And so they're now saying I'm guilty until proven innocent and have taken me off more than 30 major platforms. And now they're saying people on Facebook, 2.4 million people, cannot say my name, Alex Jones, or Infowars.com or Newswars.com, my other website, or they will be penalized unless they say something negative. So that's beyond 1984. That is a police state the likes of which the planet has never seen. And Facebook is doing this in concert with the European Union and other authoritarian states to crush speech. So I've just been chosen to be the first domino to fall as the West basically collapses and gets rid of free speech.
Okay, and that's interesting because I'm intrigued to see if this interview will actually be allowed to run on Facebook or if the algorithm will scoop us up. So that's fascinating. Facebook says you spread bad ideas, basically. They say we've always banned individuals or organizations that promote or engage in violence and hate, regardless of ideology. And they say the people who have used Facebook to try to drum up hatred against their fellow human beings are to blame for the shuttering of their accounts, not the company. They're saying, okay, Alex, you haven't committed a crime, but you're spreading bad ideas. And those bad ideas end up with dead bodies. Don't you accept that?
Well, the New York Times lied about WMDs in Iraq consciously, and it killed over 2 million people. And when Madeleine Albright, Secretary of State, was asked about it on 60 Minutes, they said 500,000 Iraqi children have died under the Clintons' sanctions that were even worse than George Herbert Walker Bush's. She said, yes, 500,000 children is a good price to pay for security in the Gulf. It was all a lie. Office of Special Plans, both wars were a fraud. It was a complete setup. Millions and millions died. They can't point to one person I've killed. It's all lies. They just say bad ideas. Well, in America, under the First Amendment, bad ideas and good ideas are all protected. And so one person's bad ideas is somebody else's good ideas. One person's terrorist is somebody else's hero. The truth is, I'm effective. And on every platform, we were dominant. I've been on Facebook since it started. We had more than 30 pages with more than 20 million people following us. They shadow banned me 2 years ago where we couldn't reach our followers. We were already basically off Facebook. They just don't want other people promoting us. This is a anti-American police state. It has nothing to do with anything I've done. Hillary Clinton told Gaddafi to work with the West. Obama told Gaddafi to work with the West. He did. He was set up. He was killed. Al-Qaeda was put in. Hillary bragged about having him murdered. So why? How is she on the air as this big savior who murders all these people with her criminal orders, but I've committed no crimes, and I'm told I'm a dangerous person?
Okay. I mean, I guess if we polled, a lot of people might say, well, ban Hillary Clinton and Madeleine Albright as well from Facebook, but that's a separate discussion altogether. One of the things people really dislike about what you've said is rather than maybe causing dead bodies, you're denying dead bodies, especially the dead bodies of children. So Sandy Hook, this school where young kids were shot up by Adam Lanza. These were the facts. 20 kids killed, 6 adults killed. Their parents are suing you. You said these are crisis actors. Those kids didn't die, though this was all set up by the anti-gun lobby, right? Do you now still believe that this was a setup and an inside job, or have you changed your mind?
Well, look, I don't blame you, but you're obviously an informed big national show, but this is another hoax, okay? Years ago, 7 years ago when it happened, locals questioned it. We covered it a little bit. When Hillary started losing, she ran $18 million of ads 3 years ago in the campaign, editing me together, making it look like I hurt these families and people to try to hurt Trump. That's when the families then sued me.
Well,
is when
the
Hillary
kids are
ran
dead, and
you're
saying your kids are not dead. The kids are dead.
No, you're not listening to what I'm saying. You remember the first Gulf War? They said that Saddam took babies out of incubators and bashed their brains out by the hundreds. That was staged. No children died. That was fake. So people have a right to question big events. They've caught the white helmets in Syria staging events. That's mainstream news.
Right.
The public questioned Sandy Hook. I questioned it 7 years ago. Hillary edited tapes of me together 3 years ago, aired those to say I was currently saying that when what they were airing was distorted, to then make it look like I was hurting some children. I have been for 4 years saying I believe Sandy Hook completely happened. But they run ads and newspaper articles every day saying that I'm harassing families and going to their houses when I never did any of that. So again, that's another hoax from Hillary Clinton, who still runs part of the U.S. government.
Okay, it sounds as if Hillary Clinton really has it in for you. I want our viewers to have a little watch and listen to a clip from your sworn deposition with regards to this lawsuit against you. Have a little listen, everyone.
And I've, I myself have, almost had like a form of psychosis back in the past where I basically thought everything was staged, even though I've now learned a lot of times things aren't staged. So, I think as a pundit and someone giving opinion, that, my opinions have been wrong, but they were never wrong consciously to hurt people.
So, Alex, how do we know you're for real? Because you're one personality on air, but here you're saying, well, maybe it's a form of psychosis. Maybe I didn't really believe that.
Well, you just misquoted me. I said almost like a form of psychosis. In a 4-hour deposition, I'm being completely honest that when I learned about Operation Northwoods, ABC News, the declassified plan to blow up buildings in Manhattan and shoot up schools by the CIA, to blame it on Cuba, to launch a war with the Soviet Union, and when I learned about the Kennedys bombing U.S. embassies in Latin America to invade Honduras, when I learned about Operation Gladio, hundreds of bombings across Europe to blame left-wingers and people in Operation Gladio. I learned about Gulf of Tonkin, 1964, declassified now, totally staged. We attacked our own ships to launch that war. Back then, and the full quote is, when you're lied to so much, and they admit that so many things are completely staged, and the Lavon affair, where Israel admits it staged terror attacks.
So let's forget Israel for a second. Let me give our viewers the full quote, right? So you say you don't trust anything anymore, kind of like a child whose parents lie to them over and over again. Well, pretty soon they don't know what reality is. So I'm not misquoting you. I've given the full quote. So you're saying you've become like a child who doesn't know what reality is. So that's why Facebook says we shouldn't be giving this guy a platform. He has millions of people who follow him. He can't distinguish between fact and reality, and people might get hurt.
That's still out of context, okay? That was a full, long statement where I explain you got some people that believe whatever the government says. You got other people now that don't believe anything they're told, because when you get lied to by an authoritarian government and media over and over again, you don't know what's true anymore, and it creates a form of group psychosis. There's books written on this, and the state and the media lying so much has created an atmosphere where people don't know what's true. Israel admits they founded Hamas. Israel admits they staged terror attacks against themselves to blame Muslims. That doesn't mean there aren't real terror attacks against Israel.
So let's come back to question. Okay, you're questioning. Fine, you're questioning. But the word psychosis, and this was your word, not mine. The dictionary definition.
Almost like a form.
Almost like a form. Okay, so almost like a form of psychosis, which is defined as a severe mental disorder in which thought and emotions are so impaired that contact is lost with external reality. Now, you've said you changed your mind about Sandy Hook 4 years ago, but Hillary has it out for you. So you believe those kids were killed, and you believe Hillary has it in for you, but those kids were killed, and you've changed your mind. And that's good to hear, and I guess for the families, it's good to hear.
Well, wait. Even back at the time, I said that I thought it probably happened, and it was probably just another Prozac head. Sir, hold on a minute. Because let's be 100% clear here. Earlier, and I'm not mad at you, but you said you didn't misquote me. You said a form of psychosis. I said almost a form,
so
or like psychosis.
Like
you went back and fixed that.
Yes.
So let's just stop. I run a company with 100 employees. I started it all myself.
Right.
Okay. I have 140 IQ. I have 4 children. Courts ruled that I have custody of all 4 of my children, contrary to what the media says. I'm a successful person who hasn't even gotten a speeding ticket in a decade.
Okay.
So out of context, you're going to the classic form of psychosis. I'm saying group psychosis when we stop believing what the media says. The opposite is what I call group Stockholm syndrome, where everyone just does believe what they're told. That's another form of group psychology, mob psychology, which is a different form of psychosis. When it's a group psychosis, people that aren't classically mentally ill can be sucked into a group hysteria, which is called mob psychology.
Okay, so I'm glad you mentioned that, you know, and I have no reason to doubt that you're a good father. I'm glad you mentioned that you have custody over your 4 kids, because your lawyer said in your divorce hearing that Alex Jones is a performance artist, right? Again, going back to my initial question, I'm like, how do we know?
You're following an exact Southern Poverty Law Center, ADL, Media Matters script. You're following a classic leftist script. Every interview I do in the U.S. that's corporate media is the same thing. My ex-wife in a custody battle 3 years ago, the full transcript you want, I'll send it to you, showed a film of me 12 years ago doing a skit as the Joker.
Right.
Okay. That was an anti-drug video I did, telling kids not to use drugs. And so I put on Joker paint, and I'm in major movies with Keanu Reeves, you name it, all that stuff. But no, I believe when I'm on air, this is Alex Jones. When I'm in a movie with Keanu Reeves or you know, Winona Ryder or something like that, then I am playing a part.
Okay.
But let me finish. They were going to show footage of me from a decade plus before, dressed like the Joker, saying he's insane, he thinks he's the Joker. My lawyer said, don't let that in to the jury trial, Your Honor. Look at the full context of the 10-minute video. It's called satire.
Okay,
when someone plays the Joker like Jack Nicholson, he's not literally the Joker, he's playing the Joker. So the media then spun it that everything I say is an act and fake because I've been in some movies and done some pieces that are fiction. That's crazy. You can have writers that write fiction and nonfiction.
Oh, that's true. Okay, so because you changed your mind about Sandy Hook, let me ask you about some of the other things that you've claimed over the years. 9/11 being an inside job, you still believe that?
Yes, and inside job means criminal elements of our government working with criminal elements in Saudi Arabia clearly had a stand down. There were clearly bombs in Building 7. I've interviewed the police. I've had former section chiefs of the CIA on, the former head of the German Defense Department.
Okay, so I want to go through these things quite quickly. Boston bombing being an inside job.
I believe that's out of context if you said the Austin bombing was an inside job. I don't believe that's the case.
Boston bombing.
Oh, Boston bombing. Clearly, the Zarnev brothers were working for the CIA. The Russians blew their cover 1 year before.
I want to go through this quite quickly. Hillary Clinton, a demon, and I'm assuming you meant that metaphorically, running a child sex ring from a DC pizza parlor and bowling alley. You still believe that?
Those are edited together, word salad. What you just read is not what I said.
Okay, Lady Gaga's Super Bowl halftime show being a cover for a satanic rite.
I don't think it was a cover. Lady Gaga admits she's done a lot of open satanic rituals. She's written in a book that she has to have someone sleep with her because demons attack her at night.
Bill Gates is a eugenicist trying to wipe out minorities.
His dad did head up Planned Parenthood. Bill Gates has given interviews where he believes in lowering world population.
The government's using chemicals in order to turn people gay, using a gay bomb devised by the Pentagon. It's turned the frogs gay. The majority of frogs in most areas of the United States are now gay, you said in 2017. I don't know how you find out that they're gay, but you still believe that?
Okay, I know you think that's funny. I bet you $50 million that atrazine is causing frogs to be attracted to the same sex and plunging their populations. And if you type in gay bomb, BBC, you'll get the headline, Pentagon planned gay bombs to actually spray on you in the Middle East and there in Constantinople.
Okay. Robert Mueller is a demon. Again, I'm assuming you mean that metaphorically. But
yes,
you've also said that he runs a pedophile ring. Is that what you believe?
No, I said what came out in the huge court trials, and the federal judge has just overturned it and said the investigation's open again with Jeffrey Epstein and the Lolita Express and the child kidnapping aircraft flying all over the Caribbean, all over the Mediterranean, and all over the Middle East.
But you don't have any evidence that Robert Mueller is running a pedophile ring whatsoever.
Robert Mueller had Epstein as a confidential informant, reportedly, with the video cameras and all the equipment on the aircraft, blackmailing people. That has been in the mainstream news.
So let me take this a bit further. So if somebody, I mean, and I want to quote you exactly. You said the word is he doesn't have sex with kids, he just controls it all. Can you imagine being a monster like that? So This is a very spicy political time. The president doesn't like Robert Mueller. He's involved in the culture wars in the United States with the Mueller report. You go out and say the guy is running a pedophile ring. So if somebody goes up and harms Special Counsel Mueller, would you feel any responsibility for that at all?
I'm going to tell you this again. You're going to look like a fool when your listeners go check into frogs and atrazine and learn that that's real.
If somebody harms Robert Mueller, would you...
You're going to feel foolish. Robert Mueller, for a decade, controlled Epstein, who would run up to 200 underage girls at a time in a giant compromise spy operation against rich men in the world.
If somebody...
Now, you know about sex operations.
If somebody
you know about sex
decides
operations
to take
in
you
politics.
at your word and says that Mueller is a monster, a demon, a terrible guy, he also doesn't like the president, and he's running a child sex ring and decides that man doesn't deserve to live, would you have no responsibility for that?
I'm going to tell you again. Mueller has the responsibility. I wish no harm upon him physically. Mueller has the responsibility at the FBI from Whitey Bulger, where he got his start covering up Bulger's murders. Right. He's working for Mueller, right through all the cover-ups he's done his whole history. He is a very, very dirty cop, a very, very bad person. And it's all coming out about Jeffrey Epstein and the Democrats and all the blackmail and the rotten top of the FBI involved in all this.
So if Facebook's a little bit concerned that if what you said might inspire someone to do something terrible, don't they have a point? Don't they have reason to be concerned?
No, they don't have a point because they let people get on there and call for the death of Trump. They let people get on there and say whatever they want about me. They only allow you to talk about me if it's disparaging. Which, of course, you're being a good person reading your leftist script. And you kind of laugh about Hillary. Hillary gives speeches against me. Hillary finances lawsuits against me. Okay. Hillary is sworn to destroy me because I first exposed her with the medical doctor in 1996 who was running a major prison in Arkansas with the blood scandal.
Right, but Alex,
they knew
Alex, the most powerful man in the world supports you, so why are you so worried?
I'm not worried. I am fighting hard. I'm a soldier for liberty and freedom, and that's why I'm demonized and lied about, and that's why I'm here just speaking out and taking action like I always do, and I'm on the front lines, and I'm effective at telling the truth, and so all over the world, the establishment fears me, but authoritarian systems and corrupt corporations and others will end up being defeated. Populism's exploding. Nationalism is exploding. Humanity is awakening, and we're standing strong at newswars.com and infowars.com, and we are effective, and that's why they want us off the air. They can cherry pick a few things out of context and make it sound like we're trying to foment all this violence. It's the Democrats and the left trying to foment a race war in this country. That's in the WikiLeaks. They got caught trying to do that. I'm trying to stop that. I'm trying to create unity and freedom, and that's why the establishment is trying to mischaracterize who I am and take me off the air, but they have failed and failed miserably.
Alex, good to talk to you on the Newsmakers. Alex Jones there. And that's all for this edition of the Newsmakers with me, Imran Garda. Check out more of our stories on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter. Remember to like, follow, and subscribe. Next time, Donald Trump's tax records reveal losses of more than $1 billion. Is the U.S. economy strong in spite of the deal-maker-in-chief or due to him? Until then, thanks for watching. Bye-bye.